This morning. Joining us right now to talk more about that is House Judiciary member, former district judge himself, Texas Congressman Louie Gohmert. Congressman, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for weighing in.
Thank you.
Give us your reaction. What do you make of the Democratic reaction to this nomination? First, they had the press release written even before they knew the name. We have the press release to show you.
Yeah.
It just said XXX. And then they just put in Kavanaugh's name, and they actually spelt it wrong, by the way. So, you know, they basically were ready to fight before.
Yeah. They had the signs made with the blank there, just fill in the blank. They didn't care who the president appointed. They were going to war over it. And it all just continues to destroy their credibility. When you're ready to just lambast anyone, no matter who it is, if a president appoints us, then it's pretty outrageous. But President Trump really had a tough battle to fight here because he had so many that were on the Republican side that were looking to have a fight. And John McCain was one of them, Susan Collins another. So with the slim margin he has, the president had to be very careful in his choice. You know, and I love the fact that the indications are that our number one female candidate, the president seems to indicate she may be ready for the next appointment, because a lot of us would like to see her there. But getting her through right now, looking at it in the last 24 hours, last 12 hours at least, that would have been a really, really tough push given who the Republicans are and how weak they are, some of them, in the Senate. So it was a good choice. You got to overlook his Ivy League background and how they don't teach much in the way of the Constitution in Harvard and Yale anymore. But other than that, you know, he does have a background that can be worked with. But good grief, they're pulling out not only things they used against David Souter, but against Robert Bork.
Right.
And they're just fill in the name.
They want to Bork him, right.
Oh, my word, it's so outrageous.
Yeah,
It does sound, Congressman, as if though you may have preferred Judge Barrett from your comments there. And so we've talked to other conservatives who feel in a similar fashion. So you'd be an interesting person to kind of weigh in on the conversation we were having right before you came on about whether his association with the Bush family is concerning, whether there's some concern in conservative circles about a drift to the left, as some conservatives talk about over the years. Do you have that concern with Kavanaugh? Well,
with President Trump, he gave us a list and said, here's who I'm looking at. These are people I will appoint. And there were people adding others onto the list late in the game, but the president was consistent. He did what he said, and I always appreciate people that are doing what they said, and I love what the president said. In fact, it was exactly what a judge dying of cancer told me right before I took the bench on the felony level before I went on the Court of Appeals. He said, look, some people say a judge should have no bias, no prejudice. Louie, every judge has bias or prejudice. The important point is to recognize where yours are and make sure they do not affect the outcome of your cases. And that's exactly what the president said. And I heard it from a very wise man many years ago, and now I'm hearing it, same thing from the president. So I think the president considered everything very carefully and made a very good choice considering the circumstances. He's got to get this justice confirmed.
Yeah.
And that's got to has to have been one of the considerations with McCain in the situation he is. We know the president called all of the senators. I think only one did not take his call. But anyway, it's pretty impressive the way the president went through this process.
Who didn't take his call? Kamala Harris?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I saw it on Fox, so it was Kamala Harris who I'd heard had not taken his call.
Let me ask you, Congressman, I want to switch gears here and ask you about some other happenings this week in Washington. The Judiciary Committee has subpoenaed Lisa Page. Peter Strzok will be in a public hearing on Thursday. What are you expecting from this as the investigation into how the Trump collusion investigation started?
Well, I was there for a good bit of the Strzok testimony when he testified behind closed doors. And so I'm not supposed to reveal what was said. I think we should get that out there. But
we know he didn't answer a lot of questions, right? Because Bob Goodlatte said
that's right. There were a lot of questions he did not answer, and there were some that, it was kind of like listening to Eric Holder at times. He knew he was lying. We knew he was lying, and it still didn't bother him. So that's somebody that apparently got very good at lying, and apparently had a lot of practice on his own wife. So he's good at it, and you can't really trust what he has to say, but nonetheless, you need to ask him some questions anyway.
Right, but the issue is, how are you going to prove, or can you prove, that those texts that the bias in the text actually dictated how he worked and his behavior running that investigation into Trump?
Well, that was one of the more just irrational statements that the Inspector General made in his report, that he couldn't be certain that Strzok was not affected by his prejudice when he summarily ended the investigation into Hillary Clinton and immediately shifted gears in going after Trump. My gosh, when you line up all of the things he said about his bias and prejudice, and then you look that every single thing he did was consistent with that bias and prejudice, and every single conclusion he came to were perfectly aligned with that bias and prejudice, then you pretty well made a case. You don't normally have a defendant saying, I am intending to rob this bank, but you look at what they did. They get in the car, they go to the bank, they pull the gun, even without the evidence of them saying they were going to intend to rob it. You have intent proved, and jurors are smart enough to pick that up. So I don't buy this stuff. You can't prove the intent if he didn't say it. It's ridiculous. It's all there. Lay it out. Everything he did is consistent with his bias.
Congressman, thanks very much for weighing in. We'll be watching those testimonies. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Congressman Louie Gohmert there. Coming up, breaking news.